Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Quianna Canada. Welcome to Quianna's show. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a transnational repression researcher and a self-appointed special rapporteur on the rights of Black Americans who are descendants of slaves. My voice feels a bit better today, and so I want to discuss a very important topic regarding political misuse of psychiatry, an incident that happened in the United States. This is a case that Black influencers and podcasters should be talking about. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about why that is. But before we get into this topic tonight, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Remember that your likes and your shares are important, and what it does is it pushes this video up in the algorithm. It tells the algorithm that this kind of content is important. It is important to say that I'm still undergoing transnational repression, and cyber hackers that are working on the behalf of intelligence agencies have not yet stopped harassing me. And so, ladies and gentlemen, if you find this, if you are Black, because I don't think that any other person would find it important unless they're allies to Black Americans, but if you find this video important or informative, please like the video, leave a comment, and let's get into this discussion. In 2019, a Army veteran named Slade Douglas was at home. He was just chillaxing at home and minding his own business. He gets a knock on the door from law enforcement, and law enforcement are arguing that someone within the Veteran Services called them to check on his well-being. And so the incident went sort of like this, and then there's just some details that I'll go into. Slade outright rejects those allegations that there was anything that there was a need to be concerned about his well-being. He rejected those allegations outright. And the next move is that he made the decision to ask the law enforcement officers to exit his home. Now, he asked the law enforcement officers to exit his home on a number of occasions. And I want to reiterate, he categorically denied the allegation, and despite the very fact that he was asking law enforcement to leave his home, they refused to do so, and they decided to conduct a search of his residence. When Douglas said that he did not consent to this unlawful search, then what happened was law enforcement made the decision to put him in handcuffs. And I think the way that I look at this situation is that Douglas was asserting his rights, especially asserting his rights within his own residence. The law enforcement officers were egotistical. And so it appeared to me, this is just my personal opinion about the situation, it appeared that law enforcement did not like the very fact that Douglas had asked them to exit his home, his residence, and they decided to retaliate. Now, let's talk about Fourth Amendment violations. And there's a couple of videos that I'll link in the description box below that I'm building on. And I think that one of these videos was created by Status Quo, but it's on another channel, so I'm not sure. I'll do some more research to see if this is a video Status Quo So the Fourth Amendment, as you know, it protects us from unlawful searches and seizures. And I want to reiterate that one of the officers conducted a warrantless search of Douglas's home, despite him not actually consenting to that search. And so the Fourth Amendment, consent has a very specific scope. And when a person, as I'm building on this video that I watched, when a person invites an officer into their home, a police officer into their home in the United States for a discussion, that does not give law enforcement permission to search your home, especially if there is nothing in plain sight that indicates or gives the officer a reason or a probable cause that there is a crime that is about to be committed, that a crime is that a crime is committed, or there's something unlawful in the home. Irrespective of this, law enforcement made the decision to search his home without his permission. And they went inside his bedroom. And you can see within the video where they were standing. I don't think that the officer could have saw all the way into Douglas's bedroom, because when you enter his home, it looks like an apartment. You're in the kitchen area right when you enter the front door. And then I think to the left, there is a hallway leading to Douglas's bedroom. So I don't think that they've seen anything illegal in his bedroom to walk down that hallway and to search his bedroom. And in fact, the video confirms that, because there was no evidence from the video that Douglas had anything illegal in his apartment. So what's more disturbing is that the law enforcement made the decision and conspired to arrest Douglas under a 5150 hold. So in California, this is where this took place in Los Angeles, the law requires an officer to have probable cause that a person is a danger to themselves, is a danger to others, or is gravely disabled due to a mental health condition. And none of these elements apply to Douglas's situation. Now, Douglas did mention in the video that he had a disability, but we come to understand that this was a spinal injury that he regrettably obtained while he was in the military. So there was no mental health circumstances that had taken place during the day in question, or from nothing that would lead law enforcement to conclude that Douglas was suffering from such. And ladies and gentlemen, what Douglas has stated is that this was a swatting incident. I'll get into that later. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to explain to you why this is a significant matter of public interest. Although this case, I believe, has been settled, this is an ongoing practice in the United States of America and the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. This political misuse of psychiatry, especially when it revolves around descendants of slaves or Black Americans, this is an ongoing practice. So they arrest him, right? They arrest him and they threaten him with this 5150 hold. And, excuse me. And from the evidence and from the statements and the testimony, it appeared as if they gave him medication against his will and then searched his body against his will. And this was all done to support a claim that drugs were in his system. But a toxicology report found that Douglas did not have any narcotics in his system. And so this went all the way through the courts, and in the landmark decision of Douglas versus the city of Los Angeles, the Ninth Circuit held calling 911 to seek help or to report police misconduct is protected speech under the First Amendment. And an officer cannot arrest you simply because you made the decision to dial for help in their presence. For example, let's say law enforcement come to your home, or in a similar situation, you're swatted and law enforcement arrive at your home, there's a knock, and then they ask to come in, and you are kind enough to let them enter your home. And then they proceed to violate your human rights. You make the decision to call law enforcement because you have law enforcement in your home that are violating your human rights. In the United States, that is protected speech under the First Amendment. And so you can't be penalized, or they can't retaliate against you because they're law enforcement there and you're calling for a supervisor because you are concerned about their conduct. And that is exactly what happened in this particular situation, is that Douglas was concerned about the way in which they were conducting an alleged investigation. They weren't thoroughly conducting an investigation. They weren't looking to rule out the information that they received. They were looking to confirm the information that they received, which is deeply concerning. And so let's talk about a video that was recently uploaded that Dr. Rashad Ritchie, he conducted an interview with Slade Douglas, and he goes through this situation again where, of course, welfare checks are a legitimate procedure, and it's used when someone is legitimately concerned for another person's safety or well-being. But when it's used as a weapon to disenfranchise a person, when it's used as a weapon to label a person, and law enforcement officers don't conduct any due diligence to ensure that there is a situation of significant well-being that they should be concerned about, that becomes a significant problem. And so I think Douglas is teaming up with Thomas Lucas of the Equal Justice Initiative, and they are making the decision to try and pass legislation to prevent this kind of activity from happening again, and to protect American citizens. And it's called the Slade Douglas Liberty Act. And Section 1 requires judicial authorization for all involuntary non-medical custody. And what is involuntary? So when police officers are stating that they received information to place a person under a 5150 hold, that would be involuntary if the person does not consent to it and they proceed to do that, right? But in this particular situation, this is not medical. So if you are putting a person within jail, you seek to hold a person in jail. Well, this requires judicial authorization. Section 2 outlaws involuntary transfer to medical facilities without judicial documentation. So explicit judicial documentation. So let's say, for instance, with Section 1, police officers they receive a call, and with this call, they receive false information that a person is seeking to harm themselves. And then they determine that information is true just off of bias or without thoroughly conducting an investigation to authenticate it. And afterwards, they seek to transfer a person to a psychiatric or medical facility. Well, Section 1 and 2 prevents law enforcement from doing that without judicial authorization or documentation. Section 3 stipulates that only neutral judicial officers, not law enforcement or medical staff, can authorize a deprivation of liberty. So even in situations where you have law enforcement teaming up with medical staff, for example, if an ambulance comes and law enforcement seek to take a person in voluntary custody to hold them in a psychiatric hold, and there is medical staff, so an person working, with paramedics, and they say, yeah, I think that this is a situation that, warrants A, B, or C. Well, no, with this piece of legislation, that would not be sufficient. It would need to come from a court to deprive a person of their liberty. Section 4 ensures government agencies remain constitutionally responsible for a detainee regardless of facility transfers. And that's protecting their rights. So under the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, etc., right? Section 5 mandates immediate judicial review and notification of rights for anyone placed in involuntary custody. So if a person is taken in under a 5150 hold, and this, of course, is involuntary, the person does not want to go, then Section 5 would call for there to be like an immediate hearing, a judicial review hearing, to examine whether there is sufficient reason to hold that person against their will. And so I think this piece of legislation is so important, and I hope that enough influencers, as well as Black podcasters, and anyone that feels that this is a detriment to liberty, that they support this Slade Douglas Act, because this is a significant concern. And I believe that there would be, I believe that there would be Army veterans, military persons, and people that have possibly gone through something similar like Slade Douglas. I believe that they would support this piece of legislation. So I'm hoping that this is a piece of legislation that passes. I want to build on, or just briefly review, critical victimology. So remember that critical victimology focuses on the process of becoming a victim through the application of the label, and reverse, the denial of the victim's status through a refusal to attach the label. So in this particular situation, from the very start, Slade was a victim. He was swatted. He expressed that to law enforcement. Law enforcement ignored this piece of testimonial evidence. and didn't decide to look further. They just decided to attach a label onto him that they felt was appropriate. It was their self-fulfilling prophecy that Slade Douglas was this person who could not perceive events accurately and that should have been taken into custody, which was so unfortunate because that deprived Douglas of epistemic justice, testimonial justice. You know, it was a testimonial injustice in that particular situation that Douglas, what he did was he began to expound on what he believed to be happening, express that there wasn't anything going on personally with him, that he did not call law enforcement, and yet they did not listen to him. So this is the denial of the victim status through the refusal to attach the label to him. Now, remember in a previous video that I uploaded that the question that critical victimology asked is who? Who has the power to apply the label, and what considerations are significant in that determination? So in this particular situation, it appeared as if law enforcement usurped, right, that power to decide who could and cannot be a victim. But the first presumption of critical victimology is about victims' rights, which are crucial to policymaking. And that's why I believe like this piece of legislation, the Slade Douglas Liberty Act, is so important, because this is regarding victims' rights, and it examines how people like Douglas, just everyday Americans that find themselves in situations like that, how they are treated in the criminal justice system and sometimes not looked at as creditable, not looked at as a person who can understand their environment. That unfortunately is ripped away from them, and they find themselves within this tumultuous cycle of policing, and sometimes that policing turns into persecution, and it turns into more. And that's why I'm deeply concerned about this. Now, I want to remind you that this is a common practice in the United States. It's a common practice in the Republic of Ireland. It's a common practice in Northern Ireland, where these countries are making use of mental health legislation and exploiting mental health conditions and weaponizing mental health conditions, whether a person has that or not, to victimize them and to silence their voice. Now, in Douglas's situation, he was taken into custody. And fortunately for him, this was a matter that was people saw as a significant concern. And that is so fortunate, and that is to be applauded, because people recognized that these are significant human rights concerns when they happen. And luckily for Slade Douglas, that the cameras were rolling, because had that piece of evidence not been recorded, so had there never been body-worn camera footage of the incident, then it would have been their word against his, and they would not have, so the public would not have seen the interaction, the courts would not have seen this interaction, and regrettably that could have disenfranchised and harmed Douglas further. And that's why I think it's so important, ladies and gentlemen, especially if you are a descendant of slaves and you are a Black American, that you record these encounters when you, even if you get a gut feeling that your testimony is going to be misjudged or misrepresented, it's important that you record that encounter. And people are going to push back at you. They're going to say that you are a troublemaker. They're going to argue that you have no reason to be recording, that you are trying to be famous, etc. Right? These are all charges launched against Black Americans to undermine their victimization. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I would argue that you do need to record these encounters now more than ever, because this practice is evolving. Although we have seen in the past that Drapetomania and the protest psychosis, it waned. So during the slavery era, Drapetomania was prevalent and very, harmful to enslaved Africans. And then during the civil rights movement, the protest psychosis was very harmful to Black Americans. And we may think that all that has waned and this is no longer a public concern or practice, but I would beg to differ, as we have seen with multiple cases that I will link in the description box below. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to reiterate that it is important for you to record your encounters, whether that is with law enforcement, whether that is with someone that you feel, I want to reiterate, may misrepresent your testimony or misjudge you and try to back you into a corner. It's important that you record that encounter for transparency purposes, so that you get on record everything that you said and your behavior and your actions, as well as the behavior and the actions of the opposite party and everything that they have said. And ladies and gentlemen, I want you to tell me what you think. Do you think that this is an evolving practice that seeks to silence the dissent of Black Americans? Is there a person that you know that is going through something similar, where their voice has been silenced over an alleged mental health concern, and they have not been able to break through this label? All of these things I want to know. Don't forget to like the video, share the video, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.